the alliance between Belarus and Russia is coming to an end. Relations between Russia and Belarus have become very complicated after it was learned that Belarusian government officials supported the coup attempt launched by Wagner leader Yevgeny Prigozhin in Russia after Russian bureaucrats admitted that the Belarusian presidential elections in 2020 were rigged with Putin's support. Belarusian lawmakers took action to terminate allied relations with Russia. Belarusian deputies who think that Alexander Lukashenko is Putin's puppet have taken action to restore Belarus to full independence. Upon learning that Lukashenko had won the election by fraud, Belarusian lawmakers who were Lukashenko's supporters cut off their support for Lukashenko and cooperated with opposition lawmakers with the joint decision of the Belarusian bureaucrats. A vote will be held in the parliament in the coming days to decertify the allied relation between Russia and Belarus and to repeat the presidential elections. Allegations that Alexander Lukashenko, who was re-elected president with an 80% vote share, as a result of the presidential elections held in Belarus in 2020 rigged, the election have surfaced again. Alexander Lukashenko has been serving as the president of Belarus for many years due to his closeness with Putin. Lukashenko, who received the support of Putin, managed to be elected as president with high voting rates in every election he entered. However, in recent weeks, things have become very complicated after the attempted coup in Russia by Yevgeny Prigozhin, the owner of the Wagner mercenary company. And it was learned that this coup was supported by Belarusian bureaucrats and some bureaucrats in the Belarusian government. The Wagner army entered the Russian cities of Rostov and Voronezh with tanks, armored vehicles, and a large number of soldiers moving to overthrow Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Chief of the Russian General Staff, Valery Gerasimov. However, the main point that drew attention to this coup attempt was that the weapons, tanks, and armored vehicles used by Wagner soldiers belonged to the Russian armed forces, as it is known. The Russian army does not allow Wagner soldiers to use their own weapons and ammunition. Prigozhin, with his own means, provides weapons and ammunition support to the Wagner army. At the same time, the vast majority of the tanks used by Wagner soldiers are purchased for money. Although the Wagner army did not have so many tanks and armored vehicles, where these tanks had appeared in Russia came from, created a big question mark in the minds. Soon it was learned that these tanks and armored vehicles were supplied Jewel by Belarus, as it is known. The coup attempt that Prigozhin wanted to make in Russia ended in failure as a result of the intervention of Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. As a result of the agreements made by Prigozhin and Lukashenko behind closed doors, Prigozhin withdrew his troops from Russia and himself fled to the borders of Belarus. Why Lukashenko protected Prigozhin has always remained a question mark. However, the real face of the business was found out later. The Belarusian authorities, annoyed that Lukashenko was Putin's puppet, thought that if Putin was overthrown, Belarus would also become an independent country again. Thus, Yevgeny Prigozhin began to be supported by some bureaucrats and opposition officials in the Belarusian government. As is known, the Russian government supplies the Belarusian government with a large number of tanks, armored vehicles, and military equipment. Vladimir Putin has also created several Russian headquarters on the territory of Belarus in order to attempt a new attack on the territory of Ukraine through the borders of Belarus. However, it turned out that the vast majority of the tanks and armored vehicles that Wagner's army used in the coup attempt were tanks that Russia had sent to Belarus. Learning of this incident days after the coup attempt, there were big problems between Vladimir Putin and Alexander Lukashenko. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said yesterday that they have started withdrawing the vast majority of Russian troops stationed within the borders of Belarus. It is believed that the reason for the withdrawal of Russian troops from Belarus is due to the cooperation of the Belarusian government with Wagner. The fact that Prigozhin, who fled to the borders of Belarus, has still not been tried by the Belarusian judiciary, has led to further deceleration of tensions between Putin and Lukashenko. If Prigozhin had been caught within the borders of Russia, he would most likely have been tried with a life sentence. However, Belarusian leader Lukashenko invited Prigozhin to his own country and put Prigozhin under protection. The situation has most of all annoyed Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. This tension between Prigozhin and Shoigu turned into a personal incident as Prigozhin wanted Shoigu could be given to him when Prigozhin invades the borders of Russia. Thus, this tension between Russia and Belarus has reached very different dimensions. Upon learning that Lukashenko supported Prigozhin after secret doors, Russian government officials made very serious allegations about Lukashenko. Russian opposition officials who stated that Lukashenko won the election fraudulently in the Belarusian presidential elections in 2020 stated that the 80% vote that Lukashenko received did not actually reflect the truth. The Belarusian government announced that the participation rate in the 2020 elections was 84%. However, according to Russian officials, the participation rate in these elections was below 70%. Thus, it was learned that Lukashenko fraudulently transferred nearly 1 million votes to himself. According to the statements of Russian opposition officials, more than 10,000 polling station attendants were sent from Russia to Belarus. These polling station officials took part in various regions of Belarus and voted in favor of Lukashenko on ballots that were surplus. When we calculate that thousands of blank ballots were used in favor of Lukashenko, at each polling station, the 1.5 million idle votes were counted in favor of Lukashenko. Thus, Lukashenko's share of the vote, which is difficult even for 50%, has reached 80%. After these statements by Russian government officials, things got out of hand in the Belarusian parliament. MPs opposed to Lukashenko expressed these claims of the Russian government in a parliamentary speech. Opposition leader Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, Lukashenko's opponent in the 2020 presidential elections, was sentenced to 15 years in prison in recent months. Kaya, who was charged with treason, had previously made statements that the elections were won fraudulently. Now, the Belarusian deputies, supporters of Tsikhanouskaya, have announced that they have started working for the cancellation of these elections and the rerun of the election. The opposition leader, who also received the support of opposition lawmakers in parliament, said in a statement made through his lawyer that these allegations of Russian government officials will be investigated in detail and submitted to the judiciary along with the documents. Due to Lukashenko's secret support for Prigozhin, Russian leader Vladimir Putin, who is open with Lukashenko, preferred to remain silent on this issue. The silence of Putin, who did not deny these statements of Russian officials, further increased the accuracy of these claims. However, the most interesting event was that shortly after this incident, Russia withdrew the S-400 and long-range Iskander missiles that it had sent to Belarus. As it is known, after the internal conflicts in Russia, the Ukrainian army increased its attacks and began to give the occupying Russian forces a very difficult time. Russian leader Putin has deployed a large number of S-400 air defense systems and long-range missiles within the borders of Belarus in order to further accelerate his dominance on Ukrainian territory. At the same time, he also started preparing for a new attack by sending some of the soldiers included in the army to the territory of Belarus with the decision of partial mobilization. Vladimir Putin and Lukashenko, who met in the Belarusian capital Minsk months ago, made statements that the Russian army and the Belarusian army will start military exercises with a joint program deck. It was said that these air defense systems and long-range missiles sent to Belarus were also sent for this reason. However, when this tension between Russia and Belarus reached a ceiling, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu stated that they had decided to withdraw these weapons that they had sent to Belarus. Another reason for the withdrawal of these weapons and air defense systems is that Russian troops fighting on Ukrainian territory have recently experienced shortages in weapons and ammunition. As it is known, the economic crisis in Russia has also affected the Russian army quite badly. A large number of Russian soldiers fighting for Putin on Ukrainian territory complain that they are left without equipment and ammunition. Shoigu is expected to send these weapons and ammunition to the territory of Ukraine. However, Shoigu's request caused a new crisis between Belarus and Russia. Defense Minister Shoigu's request to withdraw the weapons and ammunition sent to Belarus drew a big reaction from Belarusian Defense Minister Viktor Krenin. Belarusian Defense Minister Krenin said in a statement that the fees for these weapons and ammunition sent by Russia to Belarus have been paid, and it is out of the question to send them back to Russia. However, Defense Minister Shoigu stated that they have the right to request these air defense systems back under the contract. Belarusian Defense Minister Viktor Krenin, angry at Shoigu's self-aware attitude, agreed to the return of air defense systems to Russia, but set the date of this shipment as January 1, 2024. In other words, Russia will not be able to get these weapons and defense systems back before January 1, 2024. The constant silence of the Belarusian president, Alexander Lukashenko, on these issues makes the Belarusian people very angry. Lukashenko, who is being led almost like a puppet by Vladimir Putin, has never been able to make a voice against Putin. Even more angry with the revelation that Lukashenko had rigged the elections in the 2020 presidential elections, the Belarusian people began to hold protests in the streets to show their reaction to Lukashenko. People who organized anti-Lukashenko actions in the Belarusian city of Bobruisk began to march through the streets of the city with banners. The Belarusian people who feel that they are tired of Lukashenko's dictatorial attitude and that Belarus needs a stronger leader want Lukashenko to resign. At the same time, after the Belarusian deputies made statements about the renewal of the elections, the Belarusian people began to demand the renewal of the elections. Belarusian citizens who gathered around the government building in the city of Bobruisk were subjected to harsh interventions by Belarusian security forces. It is a fact known to the whole world that Lukashenko, who has held the post of president of Belarus for many years, is a dictatorial leader. Lukashenko again demonstrated his dictatorship and engaged the Belarusian security forces to detain Belarusian citizens who organized protests. A large number of Belarusian police officers took to the streets to prevent protests in the city of Bobruisk. The brawls between the police and the public have created a big agenda in the Belarusian media. It is said that thousands of Belarusian citizens were detained during the organized protest. During this period, the deconfliction between Ukraine and Russia was going on intensively. Aware that Russia was experiencing a shortage of weapons and ammunition, Ukraine began to organize air operations against Russian forces, turning the internal turmoil experienced in Russia into an opportunity. Having identified one of the headquarters of the Russian army in the city of Bakhmut, the Ukrainian army carried out air operation against this headquarters. The Russian army, which has suffered a great loss of strength with the withdrawal of Wagner soldiers from the Bakhmut front, is now having great difficulty defending the Bakhmut front. The Ukrainian unit stationed in Bakhmut wanted to identify the headquarters of the Russian army in Bakhmut by organizing a reconnaissance flight with unmanned combat aircraft. As a result of the reconnaissance flights organized, a Kuraga belonging to the Russian forces was detected and the necessary air operation was launched to destroy this headquarters for unmanned combat aircraft, which took off from the city of Bakhmut, set off for the Russian headquarters. The operation, organized with Bayraktar unmanned combat aircraft, was carried out successfully. According to information obtained from regional sources, a large explosion occurred at the Russian headquarters after the operation. It was said that the reason for this explosion was that the missiles sent hit one of the Russian ammunition depots. These problems that have been experienced recently within the borders of Russia have made the war turn in favor of Ukraine. The sudden betrayal of Ukraine. Prigozhin, who had been in friendship with Vladimir Putin since the beginning of the war, caused a major shakeup in Putin's authority. Now things have become even more complicated with the learning that Belarusian President Lukashenko and Belarusian bureaucrats supported the coup attempt in Russia, with the confession that Alexander Lukashenko rigged the presidential elections in 2020 and Putin supported it. Lukashenko's job has become quite difficult. Belarusian opposition MPs will vote again for the renewal of the election at a parliamentary meeting to be held in the coming weeks, and this will confuse Belarus. Following Belarus, Iran made a move. Another country has been added to Putin's ever-shrinking orbit. What Putin will do with a significant fall in the number of friends after losing fights against the Ukrainian army is unknown. Iran has betrayed the Russian troops in an unexpected way. Putin, who was planning an operation in Ukraine, was dealt a major blow and was unsure what to do. The Ukrainian army's supremacy in the region has been further cemented as a result of this initiative. The Russian army tried a different operation in the final days of the Russia-Ukraine war. But unexpectedly, Iran intervened, upsetting Russia's intentions. This disturbed Putin's objectives, and the Ukrainian military took advantage of the situation to reinforce its already increased influence. Despite the fact that the Russian army had finished all of its preparations, it was confronted with a huge dilemma regarding the Russia-Ukraine deconfliction. In the entire world is currently divided into two different blocks. Many countries, however, are beginning to send various sorts of support to countries that are on their side. Tanks supplied to Ukraine are one of the most essential of these supports. However, as a result of the Russian army's recurrent setbacks, an entirely different situation arose as a result of contact with a vast number of countries. Iran's latest step has significantly shifted the balance. Everyone knew from the start of the war that Iran was aiding Russia. As a result, the reactions to Russia did not decelerate one after the other. Despite the sanctions imposed on Iran, Russia continues to deliver a substantial number of weapons and unmanned aerial vehicles. As a result, other countries' reactions have been more violent, and the sanctions levied against Russia have increased. Despite receiving approximately 1,000 unmanned aerial vehicles from Iran, the Russian army has decided to use these vehicles to strike the Bakhmut region, which is unprotected by aircraft. They were subjected to the fire of long-range Patriot missiles by the Ukrainian army in a location where Putin has just created a major spy network. Despite the fact that the Ukrainian army had finished its preparations, Russia was betrayed and did not require air defense systems. In reality, it was known that Iran would deliver elements of the unmanned aerial drones ordered by Russia to the region. As a result, Iran would no longer enable the Russian army to conquer Bakhmut by properly organizing and allocating missions to several pilots. Things are problematic since Russia did not foresee the issue reaching this level. Putin had approximately 50 unmanned aerial vehicles sent to the airstrip near Bakhmut. He sent the pilots he brought from Iran to the region to guarantee the operation proceeded smoothly. Putin, recognizing the location of Ukraine, made his move. However, a big, unanticipated stumbling block has emerged. The unmanned aerial vehicles that Iran has launched to this region have been plagued by numerous persistent issues. As a result, 23 Iranian unmanned aerial vehicles crashed as soon as they took flight. This circumstance has left the soldiers in the area befuddled. But this was a much bigger issue for Iran because Israeli intelligence personnel had installed tracking devices on Iranian unmanned aircraft vehicles. According to reports, the Bayraktar unmanned aerial vehicle, which is utilized by many Ukrainians in Bakhmut, was redirected to offer intelligence to the Ukrainian army. A trap was constructed for Russian soldiers who wished to assault in this manner. The Russian army suffered a catastrophic setback as a result of the Ukrainian army's tactical prowess and lost any opportunity of launching an attack. The Ukrainian army fired a series of artillery shots at the Russian army's headquarters, forcing them to disperse their positions in the region and forcing the Russian army to retreat. The location of the soldiers in Bakhmut has been destroyed by Ukraine's drone operation. The Ukrainian army then declared victory formally. After learning of these developments, Putin grew enraged and began to reconsider his diplomatic relations with Iran. However, Israel's action has garnered notice. Israel has now become an active participant in the war as a result of Russia's purchase of unmanned aircraft vehicles from Iran. Israel is providing significant support to Ukraine in order to significantly enhance its military. However, Israel's move, which has maintained its neutrality since the beginning of the war, has heightened global tensions. The good news for Ukraine came when Israel's position on the Iron Dome gradually shifted. As a result, Ukraine has become a more serious power than ever before. The Russian alliance is unsure how to proceed in light of the Ukrainian military's recent advances under the leadership of Benjamin Netanyahu. The Israeli army has revealed plans to provide the Iron Dome system to Ukraine as a result of the successful results. December 2031 is among those who intend to continue such assistance against Russia and Iran, whose relations are increasing as the Ukrainian army proceeded to make successful breakthroughs. Soldier morale began to rise progressively. The Ukrainian army's aid in many locations is one of the key reasons why it will achieve complete victory within the country's boundaries in the near future. If this backing continues, the Ukrainian army is expected to completely force Russia out of the country's boundaries. Ukrainian soldiers will not only destroy the Russian army, but they will also shift the regional balance. The Ukrainian army will become a very formidable military power in this region as a result of the aid it receives from the West, putting Putin in a tough position after the war. Many of Putin's satellite countries are really just getting started. Ukraine, as one of these satellite countries, also draws attention. However, it appears that if Ukraine successfully exits the conflict by resisting Putin, other countries may follow suit. Ukraine's actions will cause Russia to lose its position as the most dominant player in the area. Putin is adamant about the Ukrainian war because he is well aware of this truth. The deconfliction between Russia and Ukraine demonstrates in great detail that Putin's tenacity has come at a high cost. Approximately 200,000 Russian soldiers were killed in this fight, and Putin effectively rendered his force impotent due to the loss of a considerable number of tanks and aircraft in this occasion. The Russian military was in desperate need of assistance from the countries surrounding Putin, but did not receive significant responses. If he continues in this manner, Putin's chances of regaining power will be severely harmed. While the long-term ramifications of the continuing developments in Eastern Europe are unknown, Putin's plans, as revealed by Israeli intelligence, have put the entire globe on high alert against him with his recent words. Putin hinted that this would be the first but final invasion of Ukraine, and the entire world reacted swiftly. It is well known that Israeli and Ukrainian security agencies have stated publicly that Putin is facing a number of challenges. Despite this, intelligence indicates that Putin is planning an invasion of the Baltic and Eastern European countries. This heralds the beginning of a huge global crisis. If the situation in Ukraine worsens, it is believed that Ukrainian military will receive further assistance. The fundamental reason for this is the belief that the Russian army should be prevented from entering Ukraine. In the event that this fails, Russian forces may conduct operations in other nations. The Russian military can continue to push its borders with these efforts. However, many countries are attempting to avoid this situation by working together to oppose Putin. The Ukrainian army was strengthened by transferring ammunition, food, and other supplies to Ukraine, which is the best of countries, because this is a situation that benefits no one in the Black Sea. The Ukrainian army's backing is expected to last for some time. It is known, however, that this backing will cause Ukrainian soldiers to strike heavy blows. If this trend continues, the Ukrainian army's success will serve as an inspiration to other countries. As a result, the basis for Putin's resignation will be laid. Following these events and the recent defeats, Putin was confronted with a much larger dilemma. His unexplained ailment has reappeared following the Ukrainian army coups, and things are absolutely muddled. The sounds of ambulances made everyone apprehensive in the Kremlin palace. Vladimir Putin's ailment, which he has been attempting to conceal for some time, has resurfaced. Putin, who had become weak as a result of the war's terrible conditions and stresses, was admitted to the hospital. The reports that Putin, whose illness has resurfaced, may quit, have jolted the entire world agenda. Vladimir Putin, who served in the KGB for many years, was known to have suffered from a variety of ailments during his service. Putin, Russia's president, is still suffering from severe diseases. Putin had difficulties walking in recent months when attending the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting in Samarkand, Uzbekistan. Putin, who had to walk while clutching his close bodyguard, was in such poor health that he couldn't even get off the plane on his own. But it was Putin's inability to control his hands that drew the most attention. For years, Vladimir Putin has been known to suffer from Parkinson's disease. However, it became evident during Putin's speech at the Shanghai summit that his Parkinson's condition, which had suddenly begun to tremor, had reached exceedingly advanced levels. The pressure on Putin has intensified significantly as the war between Russia and Ukraine has slowed and the Russian economy has entered a tumultuous moment. Putin, who has monthly treatments, did not stand in front of the cameras for long periods of time and kept his statements brief at the doctor's request. The arrival of 6 ambulances in front of the Kremlin residence early yesterday piqued the interest of people all around the world, according to information gathered from Kremlin-connected sources. Vladimir Putin has been taken, unwell, and hospitalized. In terms of the new specifics, recently, the Russian leader drew the attention of the Russian media by claiming to be fatigued and suffering from behavioral issues. As a precaution, Russian authorities decided to have an ambulance station in front of the Kremlin residence at all times, following difficulties such as abrupt weight loss and sleep disorders. Vladimir Putin's monthly doctor's appointment was up to 2 per month. After Putin's Parkinson's disease flared up again, a doctor began to stay at his side all the time. After the Ukrainian army conquered 3 settlements in the Russian city of Belgorod, a conference with senior Russian authorities was planned in the Kremlin. When Putin arrived to the meeting, which was scheduled for the early hours of the morning, he found he was having difficulty speaking while assessing the situation, and the discussion was postponed for a short time, according to reports. Putin and Russian General Valery Gerasimov had a talk about the Ukrainian army's incursion within Russian territory. During this talk, Vladimir Putin loses his cool and begins to tremble. The sirens of ambulances arriving in front of the Kremlin palace resonated practically everywhere in Moscow. Within minutes, Putin was transported to an ambulance after being hastily removed from the conference area. Vladimir Putin was rushed to the nearest hospital and is receiving treatment, escorted by bodyguards, according to Kremlin-connected sources. The individual taken to the hospital is Vladimir Putin, but Russian government officials deny this. The Russian media, which is still trying to keep this incident hidden, is attempting to make it appear as if it never happened. After members of the press assembled in front of the palace demanded an explanation, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stated that one of the palace's staff members had become ill and had been brought to the hospital for treatment. The fact that this tragedy was kept a state secret piqued people's interest even more. Vladimir Putin has been suffering from Parkinson's disease for many years, as is well known. According to recent claims, Putin has even begun to deploy stints in formal negotiations. Following this episode, many Russian dissidents released a press release urging Vladimir Putin to relax. Opposition politicians believe that a sick and elderly man should not be permitted to lead a country like Russia and that Putin should retire immediately and be replaced by someone younger and more vibrant. The Russian army was able to quickly establish its authority on Ukrainian territory in the early months of the war. However, the United States and Western countries' engines and embargoes against Russia have begun to put Putin under considerable duress. The Russian economy was on the verge of collapsing. Many experts who are aware of the situation have warned that efforts should be made to relieve the sanctions imposed by the United States and Western countries, and that the Russian army should be allowed to withdraw from Ukrainian land if necessary. Putin, on the other hand, believes that withdrawing the Russian army from Ukrainian land would be a humiliation to the entire world. As a result, despite everything, Ukraine maintains its occupation of its territory. Many military analysts, however, believe that if the battle continues in this manner, the Russian army will be forced to retreat. In a recent speech, Vladimir Putin addressed Western leaders and urged the easing of sanctions imposed on Russia. However, Putin's address was once again filled with threats. Putin told Western countries that Europe is hiding behind the United States, but Russia has far more powerful and hypersonic missiles than the US. Putin threatened Western countries that any country that poses a danger to Russia would be removed off the map. Despite these threats, Western governments are adamant not to withdraw their support for Ukraine energy. One of Vladimir Putin's most powerful trump cards is now being used as a threat substance. Putin, who has repeatedly opted to halt the flow of natural gas to Europe since the beginning of the war, has halted the flow of natural gas to Europe under various pretexts. Many European countries, particularly Germany, have seen energy prices rise. However, Putin was forced to reopen these natural gas pipelines in a short period of time. Otherwise, the Russian army's resources fighting on Ukrainian soil would be diminished. Putin, who derives the majority of his income from energy exports, was well aware that he would be unable to halt the flow of natural gas for an extended period of time. If it did not export energy, the Russian army's financial base on Ukrainian territory would suffer as well. On the one hand, Vladimir Putin is battling his illness. On the other hand, Russian soldiers on Ukrainian soil are also fighting the disease. The Russian army fighting on Ukrainian soil has recently suffered a large number of losses. However, these wounded Russian servicemen are unable to obtain the necessary medications and medical attention. As a result, Russian soldiers stationed at various Russian offices in Ukraine began to protest Putin. Russian soldiers claim that Vladimir Putin does not value them and that they are facing severe supply and medical shortages. At the same time, doctors have become scarce in areas such as Belgorod and Kursk, which are located near Russia's border with Ukraine. The meter-long lines forming in front of the hospital began to irritate Russian civilians as well. Doctors continue to treat ordinary people while attempting to heal wounded soldiers on the one hand. However, the doctors' patience has now run out. Doctors who want more drugs and doctors dispatched to cities near the Ukrainian border claim they can't keep up with the injured soldiers. The pharmaceutical business has been severely harmed as the war's bloodshed has escalated, as have sanctions and embargoes imposed on Russia. Russian individuals are now unable to access the medications they require from pharmacies, let alone treatment. Jewel for a time. The lines that formed in front of Russian pharmacies astounded everyone. Even if they got the pills they desired, they were only allowed a certain number. Furthermore, Russian citizens attempted to furnish their own medicines through a variety of means. Russian nationals visiting neighboring nations obtained the medications they required from pharmacies in those countries during their visits. Jewel simultaneously, he was bringing the medicines of numerous relatives from various nations back to the Russian border on order. If the battle continues in this manner, Russia appears to be on the verge of a major crisis.